History 3:39-16. Papias 120 also is quoted in Church History as Eusebius 3:39-15. We read, Mark, having become an interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately, though not in order, whatsoever he remembered of the things said or done by Christ. For he neither heard the Lord nor followed him, but afterwards, as I said, he followed Peter, who adapted his teaching to the needs of his hearers, but with no intention of giving a connected account of the Lord's discourse, so that Mark committed no error while he thus wrote some things as he remembered them, for he was careful, for one thing, not to omit any of the things which he had heard, and not to state any of them falsely. So we're already very, very clearly got early, strong historical material to show that the Gospels were in circulation in the 1st century, because we're quoting 2nd century writers, which implies that these texts come from the 1st century, and we can trace who wrote them and that they were significant in the early church. 130 AD, the letter of Barnabas gives a quotation of Matthew. We have the Didache in 100-105 AD, gives a quotation of Matthew. We read in Didache chapter 8 verse 2, he quotes Matthew 6:5, and do not pray as the hypocrites, but as the Lord commanded in his gospel, pray thus, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, etc. So strong historical attestation there of the early Gospels, and anybody trying to debunk that information that I'll give you would utterly fail. It's just based on solid, very, very solid scholarship, and so it would be very foolish for anybody trying to debunk that information. And you can easily debunk the skeptics by going to the Church Fathers and finding the comments and quotations that they make. So that's the evidences of the authorship. Now I just want to reflect a little bit on the origin of the Gospels. How do we know for sure that that we have these Gospels from these ancient writers? How do we know for sure? Well, let's just go back a little bit to Tertullian. Tertullian says, the same authority of the apostolic churches, this is the early church father in 200 AD, the same authority of the apostolic churches will afford evidence to the other Gospels also, which we possess equally through their means and according to the usage. I mean the Gospels of John and Matthew, while that which Mark published may be affirmed to be Peter's, whose interpreter was Mark. For even Luke's form of the Gospel men usually ascribe to Paul, and it may well seem that the works which disciples publish belong to their masters. Well then, Marcion ought to be called to a strict account concerning these other Gospels also, for having omitted them and insisted in preference on Luke, as if they too had not had free course in the churches as well as Luke's Gospel from the beginning. Nay, it is even more credible that they existed from the very beginning, for being the work of the apostles, they were prior and contemporary in origin with the churches themselves. So Tertullian kind of like basically nails it on the head for us, really. I mean, that's solid historical information to trace the four Gospels to their authors. Now, people will say, well, why don't we have the names on original text? Well, people don't realize what was happening in the first century concerning publication. In the area of publication in the first century, an author wouldn't act the way an author acts today. If you publish a book today, what will happen is a publisher will print it for you, and it will have your title and your name within the book, etc. But that was completely different in the first century. If you were publishing a book, what would happen is you would be the sole controller of that book. That would be the first thing. So what you would do, you would finance yourself copies of your book, and then you would encourage people to make copies of that. All the time you would be in control of the process, and then when copies of the copies are made, it would be seen to have gone public. Also, in the act of reading in public in community, that would also be seen as act of publishing. On top of this, you could have individuals copy the work, which you would donate a copy to one of the major libraries, and people could copy your book freely. There was also people who were wealthy who would take on the financing of the copying of your book. So that was the kind of culture in the first century, in the first century. But here's some more important information. When a book was published, there would be right at the bottom there would be a information about the title, but also there would be a piece of paper attached to the scroll in order to identify who the author was. These two pieces of information would often be lost or through wear and tear, but this didn't hinder people